If you have a Bible with you, it will be helpful to have it open at Ezekiel chapter 8. And we're going to examine another vision that Ezekiel had this morning. You remember last week we saw a very odd vision that Ezekiel had in, chapter 4 and onwards, where he is told to lie beside a model city, as it were, of Jerusalem for 430 days in total. He's to build a battering ram, a siege ramp against the city, and he's to cut off his hair and to burn a third of his hair and chop up another third of his hair and scatter the last third to the winds. And we saw last week how this was God's way of showing the captives in Babylon, where Ezekiel was, that he was going to judge Jerusalem. He was going to come in judgment on the city of Jerusalem because they had turned away from him. Now, this vision happened about a year and 2 months later. So this is after those 430 days. Now, if you're mathematically minded, you might object that 430 days does not equal 1 year and 2 months. But for various geeky and nerdy reasons, that is actually the case. But I'm not going to go into all of that. You'll be pleased to hear this morning. If you're really interested, come to me afterwards and I can explain why that fits. But we're not going to go into that. Suffice to say that this vision came after Ezekiel's initial vision that he saw. And this vision in many ways explains why God is going to come in judgment on Jerusalem. We'll see that this vision happened in the 6th year, in the 6th month, on the 5th day of the month. That's the 6th year since Ezekiel has been taken captive. You remember how Nebuchadnezzar came early to the city of Jerusalem, besieged it, but Jerusalem at that time surrendered. And Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, took Jehoiachin the king and all the royal household, as it were, from Jerusalem and took them captive to Babylon. And Ezekiel, the priest, was taken with them. And he's now been captive in Babylon for 6 years. Meanwhile, Nebuchadnezzar put a puppet king on the throne of Judah, who was Jehoiachin, the real king's uncle, and his name was Zedekiah. And he is currently king in Jerusalem. So Jerusalem is still there, it's still running, but as we will see, all is not well. And Ezekiel, sitting in his house with the elders, that's the leaders of the community in captivity in Babylon, are sitting together, we read in verse 1. And while they're all sitting together in Ezekiel's house, God's hand comes upon Ezekiel. And we're told that Ezekiel sees a likeness, like the appearance of fire. Or at least that's the translation in our one. If you have a different translation, it might say like the appearance of a man. And the reason there's that difference in translation is because different copies of the Bible have a different word there. And the confusion is quite easy to explain because the word is ish or esh. And they sound very, very similar. But one word means man, and one word means fire. And translators dispute which word is in view. But thankfully, it's kind of immaterial. Because did you notice what it said at the end of verse 2? Ezekiel says, "Then I looked, and there was a likeness like the appearance of fire. From the appearance of his waist and downward, fire, and from his waist and upwards, like the appearance of brightness, like the colour of amber." He talks about this likeness having a waist, describes him as a his. So this vision, this appearance, whether it's fire or man, both are true. A human-like figure who is from the waist upward like fire, and from the waist downwards like fire, and the waist upwards like the colour of amber. And if you've got a good memory, you'll remember that it was a very similar figure that Ezekiel saw in chapter 1 above the throne of God. So it seems fairly clear that Ezekiel, in this vision, is seeing, as much as a man can see, the glory of God. And it is God himself who is speaking to Ezekiel. Though, of course, Ezekiel cannot see God clearly or as he is, because no man can see God and live. But this figure, this appearance, comes and takes Ezekiel by a lock of the hair. It must be quite painful, but presumably God had that in hand. And we're told the Spirit lifts Ezekiel from where he is and takes him, verse 3, in visions of God to Jerusalem. So Ezekiel's not literally going to Jerusalem. God is not literally carrying that distance, but in visions of God, he's taken, as it were, to Jerusalem. And he's given a tour, if you like, of the temple in Jerusalem. But it's not a very edifying tour. Now, you might be helped here. On your service sheet, I've put a little picture on the inner sheet of the temple as it might have looked during Ezekiel's time. You'll know that there were several temples built throughout history, and at this time Solomon's temple was still standing. And we have a description of Solomon's temple in the book of Kings, but various additions were made to it over the years since Solomon's time, and unfortunately there are no accurate depictions of what the temple exactly looked like at this time. But this picture is as pretty good as any that we could get. So this is possibly, at least, what the temple looked like in Ezekiel's time. And Ezekiel is taken to, we read in verse 3, to the door of the north gate of the inner court. So if you look at your picture, that is the wall which is nearest to you. The temple was facing east. So the north wall is that wall to the left of the temple, to the right, as you look at it. And Ezekiel is taken to one of those gates that you see on the right-hand side. That's where Ezekiel is taken, the gate of the inner court. So he's not right in front of the temple. He's just outside the inner court. And that will help you as you seek to picture this scene in your mind. He's taken to one of these gates, and once again he sees the glory of the Lord there, like he saw it in Ezekiel chapter 1. And the Lord proceeds to show Ezekiel 4 sights. But this is not your usual sort of sightseeing tour. Normally, when you go on a sightseeing tour, you're shown the best of something. You get to see wonderful statues or places of history or beautiful buildings. But that's not the kind of tour Ezekiel is given. Ezekiel instead is shown the worst of the temple. And he's shown 4 abominations. And after God has shown Ezekiel 1, he says, look again and I'll show you a worse one. And he does this 3 times until he comes to the 4th abomination. And we'll just look at those in turn now, and then at the end we'll see what we can learn from it. The first abomination is in verses 3 to 6. In verse 3, Ezekiel mentions that at the north gate, where he is, there was the image of jealousy, which provokes to jealousy. And then in verse 5, we read Ezekiel saying, then he said to me, Son of man, lift your eyes now toward the north. So I lifted my eyes toward the north, and there, north of the altar gate, was this image of jealousy in the entrance. Ezekiel comes to the north gate, and God tells him to turn around and look to the north. And so he looks with his back to the temple behind him. He looks and he sees an image that provokes to jealousy. You might wonder, what does that mean? Well, clearly, Ezekiel is seeing some sort of statue, some sort of image, which is serving as a rival to him. In short, an idol. Some commentators suggest it might have been like one of these great winged creatures which were there to guard the gates of places like Babylon. If you go to the British Museum, you can see them. If you go to the museum, you can see these big kind of like winged lion-like figures. And some suggest that was placed at this north gate to guard the temple. And you see paganism sort of creeping into the worship at the temple. But the important phrase is God describes it as an image which provokes to jealousy. Do you remember what we looked at last week? We were looking at the wrath of God and why God was so angry and why God said he was going to judge Jerusalem. And the reason is because God is a jealous God, but not in the negative sense of the word. It is possible to be jealous in a negative way, isn't it? Overly jealous. But there is a right sort of jealousy, the jealousy a husband has for his wife, that a wife has for her husband, that a mother has for her children. There's a righteous jealousy which says, this person is for me and no one else, in that unique sense of marriage or in a family. Jealousy is not a wrong thing if it's directed in the right way, in the right place. And God has a claim on his people. In fact, he has a claim on all of us because he is our creator. And he is righteously jealous when his people turn from him, when we turn from him. And this image is an image which is provoking God to jealousy. Now, I read a really helpful illustration during the week of what this is like. This would be like a wife sleeping with another man and then putting a picture of this other man on her bedside table where she and her husband sleep. Do you get the picture? Do you get the idea? It's an image which provokes to jealousy. No husband would take that for long. And a image like this, situated at the north gate of the temple, is an image which is provoking God to jealousy. That's the first abomination that Ezekiel is shown. But he goes further. In verses 7 to 13, he's shown another. In verse 7 we read, Ezekiel says, "So he brought me to the door of the court, and when I looked, there was a hole in the wall." Ezekiel was told to turn around, and he's brought to the entrance of the court. If you're struggling to picture this, imagine the gate as being a bit like, have you ever been to London and been to Horse Guards Parade? If you've ever been there, you'll know there's like a gateway, and you can walk through it, but the entrance to the parade is kind of a little bit separate. You have to go through a little tunnel, if you like. It's the gateway. And so this gateway is fairly large, and Ezekiel's told to go through the gateway to the entrance of the court. And as he looks, he sees a hole in the wall. And the Lord tells him to dig into the wall, and when he digs into the wall, he finds a closed door. You might say, that's strange. Why does Ezekiel have to go digging in a wall when he's literally in the gateway? He can see the court in front of him. What's he doing digging in a wall? But remember, this is a vision. Remember, there's significance to everything Ezekiel is told to do. And the point is this. What Ezekiel is going to be shown next is what is hidden. What is hidden in the hearts of the people of Judah. This image that provokes to jealousy is out there in the open. But what Ezekiel's going to see next is secret and hidden. It's done literally behind closed doors. So Ezekiel has to dig into the wall. He has to open this door that is closed. But when he does, he sees what is described in verse 10. Ezekiel says, "So I went in and saw, and there every sort of creeping thing, abominable beasts, and all the idols of the houses of Israel portrayed all around on the walls. And there stood before them 70 men of the elders of the house of Israel. And in their midst stood Jaazaniah, the son of Shaphan. Each man had a censer in his hand, and a thick cloud of incense went up." Ezekiel digs into the wall and he finds a door, he opens the door and he sees the 70 elders of Israel. Interestingly, later on, the great Sanhedrin, which is mentioned in the New Testament, in the new temple which was built many years later, they used to meet in a court or in a room, a chamber, which it seems was on the north wall of the outer court of the temple. So Ezekiel is in that place right now, and he sees these 70 elders, those who should be leading Israel, those who should be governing Israel. But he sees them worshipping images on the wall, abominable beasts, perhaps some of, again, these idols that you see of creatures with different parts of different animals, and different idols portrayed on the walls of the temple, as it were. And they all have a censer, and they're worshipping these beasts. The leaders who should be serving God and leading the people in worship of God instead are worshipping idols. Not openly, perhaps, but in the secrets of their hearts. How many leaders have we heard of who look good on the outside and put on a good show, but inside they're rotten? They are hypocrites. And that's what Ezekiel is shown here. Verse 12, Ezekiel says, "Then he," that's the Lord, "said to me, 'Son of man, have you seen what the elders of the house of Israel do in the dark, every man in the room of his idols? For they say, the Lord does not see us. The Lord has forsaken the land.'" The elders are saying, God's left us. He's forsaken us. They've taken captive, Nebuchadnezzar's taken captive the king. He's taken captive the best men of Judah. God's left us alone. He's forsaken us. So now they're serving other gods. They're saying, well, if God won't help us, perhaps these other gods will. And they're turning their back on the Lord. That's the second abomination Ezekiel sees. But there's more. God says to Ezekiel, there are still worse things to see. And we can see that in verses 14 to 15. We read, "So he brought me to the door of the north gate of the Lord's house. And to my dismay, women were sitting there weeping for Tammuz." You might say, well, what does that mean? What does it mean, have these women weeping for Tammuz? Not quite sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's near enough. Well, Tammuz was an ancient god. I believe he was a man, and I think in an Egyptian legend, but he became deified, and he became associated with the spring and with the height of summer. And the ancients used to try and seek an explanation why the sun, as it were, disappeared in the winter. Everything went cold, and all the crops failed in the winter time. And they decided that the reason was because Tammuz, the god Tammuz, had to descend to the underworld. And because he's down in the underworld, he can't be bringing life and joy and sunshine and the harvest. And so there was a ritual where they would weep for Tammuz, pray and beg Tammuz to rise from the underworld and bring back the harvest, bring back the summer. And this was a ritual, as you can imagine, which was performed year on year. And Ezekiel's familiar with this ritual, but in verse 14 he says, to his dismay, he sees the women of Judah doing this ritual. They're buying into the pagan superstitions. They're buying into this pagan worship, and they're weeping for the return of Tammuz, perhaps hoping that their tears will ritualistically bring Tammuz back. But even then, God says to Ezekiel, there are still worse things to see. And he shows him the fourth and last abomination in verses 16 to 18. "So he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house. And there at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men, with their backs toward the temple of the Lord, and their faces toward the east. And they were worshipping the sun toward the east. And he said to me, 'Have you seen this, O son of man? Is it a trivial thing to the house of Judah to commit the abominations which they commit here? Ezekiel looks, and again, looking at your picture on your service sheet, at this point he's inside the court of the temple, and he's between the porch of the temple and the altar. And he sees at least 25 men there. But they're not entering the temple. They have their back to the temple. Instead, they're facing east to the rising sun, and they're worshipping the sun while they have their back to the one true God. That's the final abomination that Ezekiel is shown. And that's why God closes with those words in verses 17 and 18. He says, "Have you seen this, O son of man? Is it a trivial thing to the house of Judah to commit the abominations which they commit here? For they have filled the land with violence. Then they have returned to provoke me to anger. Indeed, they put the branch to their nose." You might wonder, what does that mean, put the branch to their nose? Well, nobody knows. None of the commentators know, none of the translators know exactly what it means. But the meaning behind it is fairly clear. And if I could say this respectfully, the meaning, it seems fairly clear. It's like the equivalent of sticking two fingers in the face of God. That's the image that is given. It's an offensive gesture. It's an offensive action in the face of God. That seems to be what's expressed by putting the branch to the nose. And as a result, God says, "Therefore, I also will act in fury. My eye will not spare, nor will I have pity. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, I will not hear them." God is making clear to Ezekiel why he's responding the way he is. He's showing Ezekiel what the people of Judah are doing and why he is so angry. And the lesson for us is to hopefully understand better that God's anger is not capricious. God's anger is not overly harsh. When God acts in anger, he acts out of a sense of justice and out of a sense of rightness and out of holy jealousy. Each of these abominations in an increasing way are showing how the people of Israel, despite all the goodness that God has poured out on them, all the ways he has helped them over the years, yet still they are turning away from him like a wife cheating on her husband, like a wife putting that picture of her lover on the bedside table of their marital bed. That is the scale of the abomination here. And God is saying to Ezekiel, do you see? Do you understand? Do you understand why I'm coming to judge my people? You might say, well, perhaps that's clear. Perhaps that's clear as much as it concerns the Israelites who saw so many miracles and saw God work in so many wonderful ways. But how does it apply to us today? We don't have a temple. We don't worship images on a wall. At least I hope we don't, with a censer. We're not like these people in the temple. Or are we? Are we like these Israelites in the temple of Ezekiel's day? We don't have a physical temple, no, but God tells us in the New Testament that we are the temple of God. If we're a believer, especially, but even if we're not a believer, our bodies were made for God. We were all created for God's glory. We were all created to be indwelt by the Holy Spirit of God. That's our purpose, whether we accept it or not. Our bodies are the temple of the living God. And we can treat the worship of God every bit as much as in the way that they did in this vision of Ezekiel. Let's just go through those abominations one by one. They put up an image of jealousy, an image right at the front of the north gate where everyone could see. And it was put there to guard the temple. But I wonder, do we have something which guards the gates of our heart? Do we have a rival in our heart that rivals God? Something that is more important to us than God himself. It might be your wife, your husband, your children, your career. It could be any number of things, but something which you will not give up for, or you will not sacrifice for the sake of God. Now, of course, nothing wrong with having a wife, nothing wrong with having a child, having a husband, nothing wrong with having a career. But if those things rival God in your life, then they've become an idol. They've become an image, if you like, that provokes to jealousy. It might even be a religious or a political institution. We can see in the world today, people can worship political figures, rulers, and they put their hope in such a person at the expense of God. And they'll follow that person more than they'll follow God. Perhaps in today's day and age, it's increasingly the case that the image is an image of ourselves. And we put our well-being, our comfort, above anything else. And we're happy to serve God as long as we're happy. But if God tries to tell us to do anything which we don't want to do, then we say, well, that's too far. I'll give you this much, Lord, but not that. We're creating an image in our own likeness as a rival to God. Let's go on to the second abomination. The Israelites had literally images painted on the walls of the temple. But I wonder, what images decorate the walls of your heart? What do you ponder in the secret places of your minds? Because what we meditate on in private, in our free hours, what we think about, what we dwell on, that often indicates where our heart is. It indicates where our true affection lies. God says, meditate on me, meditate on my word, and you'll be like a tree planted by rivers of water. But he says the wicked are not so. Their meditation is on other things which they love more than God. What about the third abomination? These women weeping for Tammuz, taking on the pagan superstitions and religion. You say, well, surely we're not doing that. Well, it's easier than you think. I wonder, do you wince when you break a mirror? Do you avoid stepping on a crack in the pavement? You say, well, that's silly. Well, yeah, because it's silly, but it's very easy to take on the superstitions of our culture. It's very easy sometimes to just keep all our bases covered. Do you know what I mean? Where we think, well, they do this and the society does this, and I better do it too, just to be safe. And we can sometimes not realize that we're denying the worship of the true God. By our actions and by our fears, we're actually denying the Lord. I don't know if these women weeping for Tammuz actually believed in Tammuz. I don't know if they also worshipped God on the side. But the point was, they were trying to keep all their bases covered. And they were worshipping whatever in order to get a good result. It's a bit like the Greeks in Athens when Paul visited Athens in Acts chapter 18. Or was it 17? One of those chapters. And he finds an altar there to the unknown God. Why do they have an altar to the unknown God? Well, just in case they missed one. They wanted to have their bases covered. That's pagan superstition. God says he is the one true God, and we can trust his words. And lastly, the fourth abomination. Those 25 men with their back to the Lord and their faces to the rising sun as they worshipped it. I wonder, in what ways are you turning your back on the Lord? In what ways are you figuratively turning your back to him and worshipping someone or something else? It's very easy to do. As we read God's word and we see his commands, we often find what we truly love. We find where our heart truly lies. So this warning in Ezekiel 8 was a warning to the people of Judah, but it's also a warning to us. Are we forsaking God for other things? Have our hearts been captured by something or someone more than God? Now, sadly, there is no time this morning to go into the next chapter. We'll save that for a future week. But I do want to just preempt that chapter to give a little bit of hope at the end here, because you might be feeling guilty right now. You might be thinking, well, there are things in my life, or a thing in my life, which has taken the place of God's. I am like these 25 men with their back to God and their face to something else. I do love other things more than God. What can I do? Well, in the next chapter, and again, we'll look at this in more detail in a week or so's time, God tells a servant to go out and look for anyone in the city of Jerusalem who sighs because of the wickedness that is done in the temple, whose heart is broken because of the evil which is being committed in the temple. And God tells that servant to put a mark on their forehead, and they will be preserved when the judgment comes. Well, God says the same to us today. Are you heartbroken by your idolatry? Are you sighing because you see in your heart these idols and these things which so easily take the place of God in your life? Does that grieve you? Does that bother you? If so, there is hope. You can cry out to God. You can cry out to him. And the Bible says, whoever calls upon the name of the Lord will be saved. Although we've turned away from him, although in many different ways we often love other things more than God, there is a way back to him through, of course, the Lord Jesus Christ. And if we come to him confessing our sin, confessing our idolatry, admitting that we're not what we should be, then we can receive his mercy. We'll see more of that, God willing, in a couple of weeks' time. But hopefully that will just give a little bit of hope after what is a hard and, in some ways, scary passage to read. But with that passage in mind, we're going to sing our final hymn. And it's really a hymn of just what I've just described. It's a hymn of coming back to the Lord after idolatry and sin. It was written by William Cowper, and William Cowper was a poet who lived in the 18th century, and he became aware himself of something, in fact a person, who had taken God's place in his heart. And he wrote this hymn as a prayer of repentance after becoming aware of that. So let's all sing together in closing, number 793, "O for a closer walk with God, a calm and heavenly frame, a light to shine upon the road that leads me to the Lamb." And particularly verse 5, "The dearest idol I have known, whatever that idol be, help me to tear it from thy throne and worship only thee." So let's stand to sing in closing 793, and stand to sing as the music starts.